Right, good morning everyone. Thank you for coming to today's meeting. Introductions we're going to do later on as items begin, so firstly housekeeping. A fire practice is not expected. If the alarm sounds, can all present leave the building as quickly as possible by way of the nearest exit. The designated assembly point is in the public square in front of Cast beyond the fountain, away from the civic office. If there is anybody with mobility issues, please wait in the refuge area at the top of the stairs, where the emergency evacuation lift is located, and use the intercom situated to the left-hand side of the lift doors to call for assistance. No roll call will be undertaken. Thank you. In addition, I would also like to ask everyone in to ensure that your mobile phone is switched off or switched to silent mode, please. This meeting will be audio-visually recorded and will be available to view on the Council's website and YouTube channel. Can I ask those present to use their microphones to ensure the audio can be captured? Any members of the public entering the Council chamber are accepting that their images will be retained and broadcast by the Council. If any member of the public or press is intending to record or film any part of today's meeting, please ensure that it does not disturb the conduct of the meeting. So we'll move on to the agenda. Apologies for absence. We have apologies for the Chair, Councillor Jane Kidd. Do we have any other apologies for absence today?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we have an apology from Councillor Cobby.
Great. The next item is to consider to the extent, if any, to which the public and press are to be excluded from the meeting, and there are no issues on the agenda that require that. So we'll move on to declarations of interest. If you have an interest, please declare this, and a form will need to be completed following the meeting. Contact Chris, who can obviously assist you with this process. Okay. Minutes of the meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee held on the 1st of June. Can we agree that this is a correct record? Is everyone happy with that? Yeah? Brilliant. That is agreed. Public statements. We have no members of the public, so we don't need any time for that. That's all fine. So we're going to now move on to the main agenda item, which is the Annual Complaint and Compliment Report 2022-23. And I think Dulcie's going to give us a bit of an introduction before we move to our questions. So if you want to go, that'd be great. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dulcie Alton, Head of Customer Services, and I'm here today with
Nikki Harvey, Customer Experience Service Manager for St Ledger Homes.
Tony Ellen from Doncaster Culture and Leisure Trust.
And Kathy Hine from Doncaster Culture and Leisure Trust. Oh. And Kathy Hine from Doncaster Culture and Leisure Trust. Thank you.
Hello, we're here today to talk about the Annual Complaint and Compliment Report. That covers, the report summarises complaints and compliment information for 22-23 for Doncaster Council, and it also includes St Ledger Homes of Doncaster and Doncaster Culture Leisure Trust. The report seeks to identify key areas that are subject of complaints and what measures have been taken to improve as a result of that feedback where required. It also includes the current the situation with our unreasonable behaviour policy. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to questions. We've got some questions today, and I've got the first one. So I just wanted to say the introduction to this report seems to paint overall a positive picture, and it details a fall in complaints for 22-23. However, looking closer into the data, it seems a large proportion of this fall was more towards the Doncaster Culture and Leisure Trust service area. The CDC complaints for the council have fallen by 9.6%, and for St Ledger, it's actually increased by 10%. If you compare 2022-23 with 2021, you can see that overall the number of complaints is still much higher than it was back then. My question is considering that complaints in the most important service areas are not ideal, is this something that needs further scrutiny and investigation, especially when you consider the fact that the annual letter we received from the LGSCO raises concerns about how we responded to their inquiries, and that in one case, CDC's response to the complainant was written as in the letter as very poor. I just want to make it clear, I'm not suggesting that, people that work at the council do a bad job. It's just, but obviously it's something that needs looking at maybe. So that's brilliant, thank you.
Thank you. So during 22-23, DCLT received 244 complaints, which was a 64% decrease of the previous year. The reason for this is due to a significant change this year in the method of reporting complaints. DCLT have brought their process in line with the Council's corporate complaints procedure. So previously, they reported all negative feedback as a complaint, regardless if there was any allegation of fault on DCLT's behalf. So they now record dissatisfaction as customer insight if there has been no allegation of a failed service. The number of complaints that were received overall in 22-23 is much higher than 2021, and that's due to the impact of COVID in 2021, which saw the number of complaints and communication to the council drastically reduce overall. A more applicable comparison would be to pre-COVID 18-19, where the number of complaints for the council was 796, and post-COVID 21-22 there were 815, which shows that the 22-23 figure of 736 is a more comparative amount. Complaints and compliments are invaluable feedback from our customers, and we focus on lessons learned from this feedback, and we receive and use this to improve the services we provide as organisations. The directorate that receives the highest number of complaints is Place, 450 last year, but that was a reduction of 100 compared to previous years. But that's to be expected in this area because Place delivers services that affect all residents and visitors to the borough, such as waste and recycling, highways, street lighting, street scene services. But that's the director that also received the highest number of compliments. With reference to your comment on the annual Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman letter, that they stated that they felt one response to a complainant was very poor. That particular complaint relates to where a request for a statutory complaint to go to stage 2 was denied by the previous Doncaster Children's Services Trust. Now within Doncaster Council, we have a process in place where any requests for a stage 2 that are received are reviewed by a customer experience panel, which includes a head of service. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you for that clarification. So we're going to move on to a question by Councillor Hempshaw.
Thank you. Good morning. On page 21, it mentions the high level of complaints received by St Leger Homes, and I just wondered, is a large amount of that reflective of the national picture? News items such as the dangers of mould and also factoring in Brexit and the pandemic. I just wondered if you feel that that's kind of impacted St Leger Homes disproportionately.
The increase, can you hear me all right? Sorry. The increase is consistent with the picture nationally. We do track this monthly via Housemark, the data and insight company jointly owned by National Housing Federation and the Institute of Housing. For example, their monthly reports in February reported an increase in complaints volumes across the UK, with an average complaints volumes increased by 15% from December and up to 50% compared to January 2022 for some organisations. March's monthly report shows increases by almost 19% compared to February, and March's volume 78% higher than the same point in 2022. There are several factors which have impacted initial increase in complaints due to damp and mould towards the end of 2022, although this has since reduced. An increased publicity nationally by government with news reportings has increased, of latest of which was published in March 2023, so which Housemark reported had increased by almost 19% compared to February, and with the March's volume 78% higher than the same point in 22. Our most recent local data for Q1 23-24 does show a reduction compared to 22-23 in Q1, with a 9% reduction.
Did you want to follow up on anything there? Or?
No, that's fine, thank you.
Thank you. On page 35 of the report, it shows that in children and young people, the second highest reason for complaints is travel assistance, and mentions poor driver attitudes and training around staff transporting children. The Children and Young People Scrutiny panel have raised this previously. Are you able to tell us any steps that are currently being made to provide this training?
Okay, thank you. In May 23, the Travel Assistance Service delivered training to approximately 192 drivers and escorts employed by operators delivering transport services on behalf of the council. Topics covered included positive handling, safeguarding, child sexual exploitation, county lines, FGM, and the code of conduct that all staff working on runs operated on behalf of the council are expected to adhere to. They also covered policies and procedures in place on home to school transport. Further awareness sessions have been arranged to deliver this training monthly from October 23. In September 23, training was also delivered to 36 internal drivers and escorts covering various topics, including positive handling, safeguarding and the code of conduct. The Witherslack group attended the session to cover topics such as having a basic understanding of special education needs in relation to communication and behaviour, practical strategies to implement in the taxi to support journeys to and from school, feeling safer when transporting young people, understanding how to communicate safeguarding concerns and improving relationships and communication between schools and drivers and escorts. This training has given attendees an accredited qualification. The Travel Assistance Service operated approximately 400 runs in 2023 academic year. Whilst it is disappointing that approximately 12 complaints were received during this time, the number of complaints equates to around 2.7% of the runs in total.
Thank you. I'm just going to pass back to Councillor Hemshaw.
Could I just ask, I presume this training is not mandatory?
Sorry, I don't have that information with me from CYPF, but I can find that out and come back to you.
Thank you.
Major, do you want to come in quickly?
Thank you, Chair. Dulcie, thank you very much, and thank you for all the work that goes in, especially around children's safeguarding. You mentioned and you gave an extensive list of the training which you are providing. Now, has that been put together on the back of the complaints that have been raised through the complaints channel, and you've then identified the training, or is this just generic training that you've then arranged ad hoc? I'm just, because some of the things that you've mentioned, I'm just trying to square the circle of how that would have come up, and if we've had complaints around those issues in particular.
Thank you. I'll have to come back to you on whether the training is actually mandatory, or if it's mandatory training or has been brought on the back of this training, the complaints that we've received.
Yeah, so my question was more around the training that we are giving and the training that we're providing. Has that been led by the complaints that we've received? So is it directly correlate with the complaints that we've received, and then we've put training in place to ensure that, you know, those safeguarding issues don't arise again? Or is this just generic training that we've decided to take on and we're following, I don't know, some national standard, or is there some kind of internal procedures that we're following to provide that training? Because I'm just a bit confused, because you gave quite a long list of different aspects of training. So have we had complaints in all those areas and now we're providing training on those areas, or is it just training that we're providing?
Hi, thank you. The detail of the response has been provided by CYPF officers. So what I will do, I don't know the split. Some of the training's been introduced as a result of the complaints that we've received around driver attitude and training concerns around the transportation of children. But what I can do is provide you a definite split after this meeting in the training. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So I think we've got another question from Councillor Hampshire. Oh, do you want to come in then?
Yeah, I mean, it's very good that we understand that we need the training to make sure that we safeguard these children when we're transporting. But how successful can we measure that? How successfully can we measure that? We've gone through all this process, but how successful are we?
The measurement of that would be through the number of complaints, that if we see a reduction in the number of complaints that we receive against the transport service, but it also would be the day-to-day management of that service by the directorate and service area.
So can we justify that by providing the scrutiny management with the information of the improvements and come back to us in 6 months' time and see whether that's possible to make justification on the aspects of that?
Yeah, go on.
Yes, I'll take that recommendation back with me. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's worth noting that obviously next year's report will have the specific details, won't it? Thank you. It's noted. Did you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, certain elements of that probably can't be sort of measured in whether it's successful or not, because there's little things like we'd never know, but if you're giving training on special educational needs or, for an example, autism, just a couple of tips for the drivers on what not to say or how to say things, then that child would probably go to school and be able to learn, as opposed to if they have a bad experience with the driver. It might not be a bad experience for us, but for somebody with autism, it could change the whole day, because then they're fixed on what happened in that taxi, or why did he say that? Why won't he call me by my name? Do you know, things like that? So it's just, you can't measure it, but hopefully we'd just have a lot of happier teachers and children, basically.
Majid?
Yep, just following up from what Councillor Hemshall and Councillor Jones are saying, I think a recommendation that I'd put forward would be around, you know, improving the benchmarks that we use to measure how we determine whether or not training's working. And you're absolutely right, Councillor Hemshall, if you've got children with autism and, you know, their day can be absolutely, you know, ruined if they don't have that good experience in the morning, but there's no way to benchmark that currently, is there? So we need to broaden our benchmarks so we ensure that the complaints that we are getting are handled better and that the training that we're delivering is working and reaching our target audience. If other panel members are in agreement with me.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's worth noting. Obviously, complaints is a procedure that is always ongoing, and you know, it's good to try and, you know, we obviously have the yearly kind of point where we look at what's happened and what the plan is going forward. But, you know, maybe it is worth kind of thinking is that, you know, I'm assuming obviously bigger, more serious issues get dealt with as and when anyway. But if we can try and learn on the interim period as well. Okay, so let's move to the next item. So I'll move to Antoinette. Have you got a question?
Hi, morning. It's around page 26, the children and young people's aspect of the report, the recommendations of the Ombudsman and the agreed moving in process. Has that made many changes to the process, and what are the implications for children and young people? And there's a second part, but I'll ask that when you've answered this.
Thank you. The recommendations from the Ombudsman have been implemented mainly through reorganising responsibilities between senior officers and managers to ensure there's a weekly oversight of all children without a school or on reduced hours within mainstream school. Senior officers are ensuring that their officers prioritise contact with other authorities. Having the EHCP in advance of the child moving in means we could identify a setting quickly and consult prior to the child moving into Doncaster. The head of service responsible for SEND, attendance and pupil welfare and inclusion teams has brought them closer together, ensuring a joined up approach from all the service areas.
Thank you for that. Those seem really sensible recommendations that would actually make the process more seamless and perhaps smoother. So thank you for that. When will the additional social, emotional and mental health provision be up and running that was mentioned, and how will the provision be rolled out across the borough to ensure maximum impact?
Okay, there'll be a social, emotional, mental health hub in each locality in Doncaster by January 24. This will introduce 40 places for children and young people, 30 of which will be in the primary phase and 10 in the secondary. CYPF are currently working with schools and families to oversee transition to these hubs. Whilst they're expecting to introduce further provision in future years, we're also making substantial changes to the local system in order to ensure that needs can be identified and met at the earliest point, supported by funding and expertise from local authority teams. This will be accompanied by changes to the local landscape of alternative provision providers, which will make more places available to support assessment and reintegration into schools. The local partnership is currently developing an integrated assessment model, which will also support schools with delivering support at the earliest point.
Thank you for that. 40 sounds like a lot, but actually in a borough the size of Doncaster, it isn't that much, is it? Do you perceive that bit to be adequate, given the difficulties that many families have in access, in particular for young people, mental health services? Like I said before, I don't work in CYPF, so I don't have the details behind the services, so I can take that, I'll take the comments back from yourselves and provide you with the answers. Thanks very much.
Just before we move on, Councillor Hemshaw, did you want to ask you a question regarding SEND and the HCP?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just seems to be a bit of an overlap of categories of complaints, like just wondering why SEND would be a different figure to EHCP. It's, to be honest, I do feel that if the categories were just under SEND and maybe even travel assistance, because that largely affects children with SEND, then the figures would be a lot higher, but it feels like it might have been split just to make it look like the figures are not that high.
So complaints are allocated according to the service area. So, for example, SEND, attendance and pupil welfare, inclusion and behaviour. If the complaint is about an EHCP, that's recorded separately to general complaints from parents about children who have special education needs but do not have an EHCP. Usually complaints about EHCPs are around timeliness of issuing or refusal to issue a plan where the SEND panel has decided the child does not require an EHCP because their needs can be met with quality first training. So all complaints are allocated to relevant officers within the head of service, quality assuring the response. Where there's an overlap of service areas, the head of service will allocate the request to more than one officer to complete. One officer will have overall responsibility of contacting the complainant, investigating the complaint and writing up the response. But the head of service of equity and inclusion covers all the complaint headings above and therefore has oversight of all complaints, even though they're logged separately.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying. It's just that, you know, if you'd have a potential 28 complaints out of 64 that are all linked with some sort of SEND is in there. So it just feels a bit convenient that it all gets split up. But I know what you're saying now. It makes sense to split EHCP because it's primarily about that, and that some children with SEND don't have an EHCP. But at the end of the day, it's still special educational needs. So I know you're probably not, I'm not asking that question. I just want to point that out. I just feel that it does feel a little bit convenient because when you look at those figures, it all looks a bit sugar-coated. But I don't know if I'm not saying it's intentional, but, you know, the bigger picture is to look at what is the amount of complaints that are all around SEND. That's what I'm trying to get at. Thank you.
Yeah, I take those comments back, and moving forward we could track those as well through the customer experience team, because they allocate the complaint, they coordinate all the complaint and the complaint responses. So we can always change the tracking as well, so we could track both areas.
Thank you for that.
Okay, so I think we're going to move back to another question from Antoinette.
Thank you. So I note the excellent news that 22-23 saw the lowest number of households in B&B accommodation as a result of changes brought about by the Journey to Excellence programme. So that's really good. How is the in-house training programme that was launched in February going? How many or have all employees attended that training? And I know it's only anecdotally, but does it feel like there are less customer service complaints?
Thank you. The Customer Excellence Training Programme is a continuing programme. The objective is for all employees to attend this mandatory training. As the training has only recently been completed, it is too early to analyse the impact on complaints, but this and satisfaction with the service we provide has been identified as measures of success, so will be tracked. Those employees who have, for a variety of reasons, not attended the initial training will receive training from in-house trainers who are currently undertaking training with our external training providers. So the intention is that the training will also be delivered internally to new employees and will form part of their induction process. So it is just too early at the moment.
So those employees that have attended it, do they feel better able to deal with complaints? Because often that's the problem, isn't it? It's not that people don't want to deal with complaints, it's they're not always in the best place to deal with them in an effective or necessarily kind of efficient manner. So do the employees themselves feel that the training's been worthwhile?
For everybody, I'm not too sure on that, but because I haven't got that information, but I can find that out for you.
Just a general feeling, thank you.
Great, okay. So I think we're going to move now to a question by Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. So page 5, the first bullet point around the adult social care duty teams, it talks about the complaints around the inconsistency from workers and says, as a result, that training's been introduced across the spectrum and practice guidance. My question is really, how can you evidence that that training's worked?
So the improvements to the adult social care duty have been evidenced by reduced handovers to other workers, which ensures that the person gets consistency and does not have to keep retelling their story. If there's a change in worker, the clearer handover process ensures that the worker has all the information, making it a smoother transition for the person, as the same question won't be asked. Going forward, the changes to the access to adult social care will embed the locality-based working further in line with the practice framework and ensuring that every contact counts, that the person speaks to someone based in their community and that they have a named worker from that first contact. The evidence of this improvement will be gained by feedback from the person making contact, either on the same day if no follow-up call is required, or at the end of any involvement, whether that's a follow-up call or when the support from the worker is no longer required. So they're currently developing feedback forms in the social care system, and once those are live, workers will be able to record and report through that system.
I suppose I was looking for possibly in supervision, and I'm very conscious that when things go wrong, the whole team are lucky enough to get the training. And I know this is how it works in government organisations because I worked in one for 50 years. That sometimes seems a bit unfair to the group of people who were doing a good job. But, hopefully those questionnaires, in another meeting this week, I was told clearly that people are fed up of doing feedback forms and questionnaires. So I'm hoping that they're going to successfully evidence that that training's worked because, in the public, we hear for everything that's gone wrong that lessons have been learned. And it's what we say about everything, but then the same thing happens, quite quickly a few months down the line. So maybe we need to change our language and hopefully the training and the things that have been implemented can be evidenced to have had an effect. Thank you.
Councillor Jones, do you want to come in?
Thank you. Just on that particular point, just talking about what Glynis has wrote down there about adult social care duty teams. How's that reflected in the fact that duty teams may not be responsibility of the council, and that we talk about across the spectrum? I'm trying to understand what this spectrum is. I have an understanding of trying to go back to the adult social care duty teams. We as a council, we contract other people out to actually perform social duty care, and I'm not sure how the relationship between those actions or inactions and complaints within the system are processed back through into the councils. That's one of the points. And I've just no understanding of what the spectrum is. You know, I was talking about all the different organisations, and I think I need to know and have an understanding of those organisations.
When it refers here to the adult social care duty teams, I believe that it is actually the council staff that work out in the areas in the duty teams.
Yeah, but social care is not just undertaken by the council. Social care is undertaken by a number of agencies.
Yeah, I'm not sure we can get into like specific details about outside organisations, can we?
I can accept that, but what I'm trying to do then is relate the agency's process in complaints against how that feeds into this report. If there's no system there to actually accept that, and there's no explanation, as I've seen, how that happens, how can we understand whether we're getting the right complaints? And I've got to ask, because I've gone through a particular aspect, one example myself. That's why I'm asking, and I've got to have an understanding of that. And I end up going back to a number of different people asking, why can't we do this, or why can't we do it? It's not necessarily a complaint. It starts with a complaint, because I've said I don't think this person's getting the appropriate support. But then my complaint goes back to 3 or 4 different places.
Yeah, so I guess, I mean, just if I'm right, what you're saying is how are complaints from outside organisations fed into the council and considered by perhaps?
Within this annual complaint and complement report, they're the complaints that really relate specifically to Doncaster Council. Any complaints that are dealt with through agency, through Adults Health and Wellbeing, I would have to come back to you on that point, because I don't have the specific details.
Councillor Khan, did you want to come in?
It's important, Chair, that...
Yep, just on the same vein, I think what we're trying to work out here is that if we're having services commissioned outside of the local authority, and what their complaints procedures are, and they in line with what ours are as a local authority, and whether there's synergy between the two, and whether we get feedback, and ensuring that Doncaster residents are getting the best. And do we have a mechanism of feedback from those agencies to ensure we can monitor what complaints are coming in and how we handle that, and if they're working to the standard that we would expect of other organisations? I think that sums it up. Councillor Allen, would you?
Well,
Yeah.
There's a lot more to it in some respects. I know for a fact...
Do you want to put your...
Sorry. If nobody can hear me, something wrong. I know for a fact that through St Leger, I've asked certain questions, because you would think tenants under St Leger originally would be part of the system. But actually, in 4 occasions in this council, we sublet 4 properties. They actually then fall out of the system. Again, they fall out of the system. because it's not St Ledger that are doing the work in looking at them directly. It's the subcontractor. And consequently, I've asked questions about it. I'm still not really satisfied about the answer. I'm not concerned. I am not concerned to that extent because it was clearly related back to me that there were only 4 instances in the council. But actually, one of those instances was the one that I'd got involved in. And that's where I'm trying to follow this chain of what happens to make sure that it's registered. You get the impression that possibly it gets so far and then it just drops off the cliff.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that it will be beneficial at some point to get some for someone to come back and sort of say this is how we handle things with external contractors. Antoinette, did you want to come in briefly?
Yeah, it was just a comment really. I wonder if we're asking how we quality assure the services that the council subcontracts out, either because it hasn't got the capacity to do it or whether it's because that is the whole service that's subcontracted out and what the processes are. And I don't know whether that's a complaints thing or a quality assurance aspect.
Thank you. Councillor Khan, did you want to come in with your question?
Thank you, Chair. If we go back to the first question which was asked and the response that you gave, it was around, you said failures of service equals a complaint. So with that in mind, if we're receiving numerous queries from members of the public or different officers are around issues which are starting to emerge, are they classed as one complaint as a whole, first of all, or are they classed as separate complaints if they are classed as complaints? And if that's the case, when we identify that we've got an area of service which is failing, so, and like you said, failure of service is a complaint anyway, so how do we identify that? How's that packaged up and how is that then dealt with? And I mean, something very simple which I need to understand is unless they put in their email or their letter or their correspondence complaint, but it's a query, does it get classed as a complaint or not?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, if a member or officer receives a number of reports from customers about the same issue, for example, reporting potholes or dumped rubbish, street lighting, these wouldn't be initially classed as corporate complaints but as a request for a service. However, if the council then continue to fail to provide that service or the customer is unhappy with the service that's been provided, either due to delays in providing that service, failure to provide the service, such things as lack of communication or actions of staff, the customer may decide to make a corporate complaint that would be handled and managed through our council's corporate complaint process. It's the responsibility of the public member of the community to raise a corporate complaint unless they provide explicit consent for a member or an officer to do that on their behalf. Or customers can ring like the call centre and we will log complaints on behalf of a customer.
So, like I said, going back to what you said in response to question 1, a failure in service is a complaint. So if we've failed to provide a service, that in itself is what warrants a complaint. So if people are then querying that service, why is it not being logged as a complaint? I don't want to go into specifics because it's something which Dan and the Mayor are probably dealing with at the moment, but we've had numerous emails, and other members here have probably had those as well, about a specific aspect of service as a local authority which members of the community feel that we've really let them down on. And not one of those letters have I seen anyone actually put down the word complaint, but it is a complaint. That's why we're having so many emails. My inbox is full of them coming in. And what I'm trying to work out is, would that be dealt with as a collective, as a complaint? Well, first of all, you're saying it wouldn't be dealt with a complaint because they've not put in there that it is a complaint, even though they're querying the level of service they're receiving. Secondary to that, then if it was dealt as a complaint, would it be one complaint as a whole? Or would it be separate individual complaints that are coming in around the different aspects of service? I don't want to go into the specifics of what I'm trying to ask because it's an ongoing issue right now, and I think the chair's aware of what it is as well, but I don't want to really, but I'm trying to get out of you the mechanisms of how we deal with customers. Because out in the public, if I send an email in about aspects of service delivery, I'd consider that to be a complaint. Does that help?
So if a service is receiving a lot of complaints or service requests about the same thing, what we tend to find is we know that that area's having an increase in certain areas, and that's obviously a lot of that is for within the service to manage. But you naturally see complaints coming in. To have something logged as a complaint, the customer doesn't have to put in their response a corporate complaint or a complaint. It's a message of dissatisfaction that we would log that. If in a particular area we're seeing a peak in service reports and complaints, each complaint would be logged individually, not as one complaint, and that would be reported on. The customer experience team, as a matter of course throughout their role, highlight trends that are coming in. We provide regularly reports for service areas and directorates on what the complaints are, and we will highlight, they will be aware, but we will highlight any trends that are continuing or anything that's declining and capture lessons learned around those areas.
Just so we're absolutely clear on this then, so if residents of Doncaster are emailing in with queries with dissatisfaction of service, that would then be classed as a complaint and it would be logged accordingly. And secondary to that, if those, the queries that are being raised, if they're coming in to directors and to the mayor, to elected members, is there a mechanism for those directors then to feed that back down to whoever lodges these complaints and to keep an accurate record of that?
So if members and chief executive or whatever are receiving emails about a specific service area, then those would go to that specific area to be dealt with within that management structure, and the complaints, if we receive those, are logged and monitored through the customer experience team.
Like I'm saying, they're not complaints, they're queries. This is why I want you to be really clear on this, why I really understand this, and other people who listen to or watch this video later on understand the difference. So the queries coming in, are they complaints then? That's what I'm asking.
No, if enquiries are coming in about to service areas, about service reports or to them, that would be dealt with as service reports and enquiries within that service area.
So people emailing in with a failure of service, like you said in response to your first question, failure of service is a complaint, but it's not a complaint. The failure of service is not a complaint then. I'm trying to be really clear on this. I want to get my head around what it is.
If a customer wants to log a complaint to the customer experience team, or a complaint is received to a service area, then that should be handled through the corporate complaints procedure. But alongside that, we will always get as well service requests and service reports for enquiries.
Can I just talk through a hypothetical then? So I've got an issue with a particular area of service. I send an email in to the director who's responsible for that aspect of work, the mayor and the cabinet member and other members as well. I raise a query. I don't put in there that this is a complaint, but I say I have been really badly treated by the local authority, or the local authority have let me down because of X, Y, and Z. But nowhere in there they will mention this is a complaint, but they outline why they're dissatisfied and why there's been a failure of service. And going back to what you said, a failure of service is a complaint. So bear that in mind as well. So that comes in and it goes to the chief exec, it goes to the mayor, it comes to the cabinet member responsible and to the directors, and it comes to members. If that's not a complaint, then I'm really struggling to work out what a complaint is.
Can I just, didn't you say that that he doesn't have to specifically mention the word complaint for it to count as a complaint? That's right, isn't it?
So, Chair, that's what I'm trying to get clarification on, because there were two responses. One was that from Dulcie, that yes, it doesn't. Then in the following response, no, it wasn't. So I'm just trying to be really clear for scrutiny purposes, so residents of Doncaster understand what's going on here. We're absolutely crystal clear on this. So is that multiple queries raised by members of the public going to the chief executive, to the mayor, cabinet members, directors and elected members? Are they complaints or not? And are they dealt with as complaints? And if they go to, like we said, to cabinet members, directors, chief exec and the mayor, is there a mechanism for those to be then lodged, those queries to be lodged as complaints? So they're in our figures and stats as well. Because I don't know about you, I've had multiple, I don't know if you've had as many emails as I have, but I know you've been copied into some of those. And in my opinion, don't know if you agree with me or not, Chair, but they are complaints. They're not just queries, are they?
No, I agree. And I think that was what Dulcie said, isn't it? Is that they don't have to say complaint for them to be a complaint. And obviously they're fed to the relevant service areas as well.
Yeah, if you get where the customer is really dissatisfied with the service and numerous complaints, if they are forwarded to the customer experience team, then they would be logged as a complaint.
So, Chair, I know I'm taking up a lot of your time, and bear with me. So what I'm trying to work out is the mechanisms for how this works. So who then would lodge that? Would it be down to that resident to go and raise it, or would the relevant director, cabinet member, the mayor or the chief exec, would they then raise that and lodge it as a complaint?
Depending on the individual inquiry, it depends. Complaints coming from all those areas. So it would depend on each individual inquiry as where it comes in. We would receive complaints from customers, councillors, through the chief exec office, through the mayor's office.
Like I said, we're talking really specifics and hypothetical here. An email's gone in to the mayor and to the chief executive and to the director which leads a service area and that cabinet member which is responsible. The queries of dissatisfaction, people are not happy. Who out of those, out the chief exec or the mayor or the cabinet member, who would lodge that as a complaint?
Oh, stop working for a second. I think what we're saying is that it could be any one of those people that the complaints. There isn't a singular sort of inbox, if you will, that the complaint has to go through. So as long as somebody's got it, then the complaint will be lodged.
But Chair, my point is that if everyone's responsible and no one's responsible, how do we ensure that they're not slipping through the net and not getting lodged as complaints? So if the mayor's not done it and the chief exec's not done it and you've not done it and I've not done it, as people have received those complaints, because we've made an assumption that we're all responsible for doing so, who does the responsibility lie with to lodge it as that complaint? It could be that we've got potentially 35 emails that I've had and not a single one has been lodged as a complaint because I've made the assumption that you would do it, or Dan or Roz or Damien or somebody else would. So what is the mechanism I'm trying to work out? How do we ensure that complaints are captured properly and they are lodged as complaints?
I think that it would. So from my point of view, the way I kind of see it is that it would depend on, in my eyes, that maybe the seniority of the people involved. So like you're right, you might decide not to. That's fine, John. So have you got an answer for that one?
Yeah, it depends. There's not, in the complaints procedure, how the complaints come through is if people are dissatisfied. If you get a complaint, there's not the clear pathway where it says, well, if the director gets a complaint, they log it as a complaint, because it would depend as well on each individual what is contained within that email, within that report. But if you get complaints that you believe are complaints from customers that should go through the corporate complaint process, then send them to the customer experience team, as can the directors and the service areas and public themselves.
Chair, I'm really concerned that we've got the potential here where we're going to be receiving complaints and queries from members of the public and they're going to slip through the net because they've been sent to multiple people and there's not been one direct source. And so I'd make a recommendation that we need to overlook our complaints procedure to ensure that when complaints are received, there's a clear pathway of how they're handled and they are lodged as complaints. If anybody would second that recommendation.
In front of me now is corporate complaints procedure and a flow chart. This is not for this council. I can't find one for this council. You know, you would thought as a council that we would bring something so important to the working of the council and the support of communities to be straightforward. But when you go to our website, it doesn't do that. It's quite clear what we've just said is that, you know, the process is quite clearly set out here, and someone makes that decision that it goes forward from stage 1 to stage 2 as a complaint. I think what we're trying to explain here is that if that person, or whoever it be in that initial stage, thinks, well, I don't reckon that's much of a complaint, it don't go anywhere. That's what happens. it follows down the line, doesn't it? Because if it don't go anywhere at this level, which is just the explanation that the chair's talked about seniority, it don't go anywhere, does it?
Councillor Needham, did you want to come in?
Yes, thank you. I've been listening intently, and I think it's an important debate and a discussion we're having. But the overstriking thought that comes to my mind is, what is a complaint? Because what is a complaint at one level isn't a complaint at other. So if somebody's, for example, saying, oh, there's a pothole in my street, and that's a request for a service, you know, as Councillor Khan quite rightly said, that is still some form of a complaint, isn't it? But equally, you know, if somebody's making or got concerns around safeguarding in children and young peoples, that would be classed as more of a complaint and a serious thing. For me, and I'm trying to sum up here, is they're all complaints, but there's not a specific definition of what a complaint is. So for some people, a complaint is a pothole, because it's a saying that service is not required. For other people, it's more serious. Is there a specific definition, and are there grades to it? Because I think that's what's muddying the waters. I think we need to be clear what it is.
Okay, the council's definition of a complaint is an expression of dissatisfaction, however made, about the standard of service, actions or lack of action taken by the council or their staff, which affects a customer or a group of customers.
Yeah, I was just going to say then, so then that means then, if that's quite a clear definition, isn't it? So are we capturing everything that comes under that heading?
We would, if for example a customer makes a report about a pothole or a street light or a misbin, that would be classed as a request for a service, and it would go to the service area to deal with that service and deliver that service. If then, say, we failed to report the pothole and we continually didn't deliver that service, then and the customer came back to us, then that would be classed as a corporate complaint. Yes.
Yeah, that's fine. That seems pretty clear to me. Did you have another question, Majid?
Chair, it's just me, which I really don't understand this, so you're going to have to excuse my ignorance, but I'm still not getting my head around this. And Councillor Needham, thank you very much. But that explains, you know, what I'd say low-end, basic, everyday use, my bin's not being collected. First time you report your bin's not being collected, I wouldn't consider that to be a complaint. You're requesting that your bin is emptied. But if every week for a year your bin doesn't get emptied, then it warrants a complaint. I get that. But with a missed bin collection, people wouldn't be emailing the mayor, the chief executive, the heads of service, directors and elected members, would they? Well, but with multiple emails, yeah, no, yeah. You'd probably get a one-off. But if you're receiving multiple emails at that level with dissatisfaction, what I'm trying to work out is we're saying that dissatisfaction of service is a complaint, which we all agree on. But if it's received by people, what is the mechanism for that to be lodged? So what if, as an example, I've received an email and I've said, okay, Jake's also received the same email. Is it my responsibility then to put that forward as a complaint? Is it Jake's, or is it Dan Swain's, or is it Ros Jones, or is it Damien Allen's? Who in the chain of people who have received that complaint are the ones who are going to lodge it as that complaint? I want to make sure that we're reflecting the true figures of the complaints that we're receiving as a local authority, ensuring that our residents are getting the best service.
Whoever receives the information or a complaint on an email, that complaint can be forwarded by anybody to the customer experience team. And if it's received multiple times, that's better than not being received at all. And the customer experience team will log, record and monitor that complaint, and they will know if it's the same, because we often get, like you say, emails that have been sent to lots of different people, including the complaints team, including customer services. And we will monitor that, so we know that that complaint, if it refers to one specific customer, then it's logged as one complaint. If it's received very similar complaints for different customers from different areas, then they would be logged as individual. If in doubt, what I would say is send it to the customer experience team, and they can provide advice and guidance and liaise with you on that.
My point is more around the process of this. So there could be an assumption. I might assume Jake's done that. Jake will assume I've done it. And Damien will assume Dan's done it. Dan will assume that Damien's done it. And Ros will assume that, Councillor Phil Cole's done it, and Councillor Cole will assume that the Mayor's done it. And we're all just expecting other people to fulfil that role of forwarding it on. From a procedure point of view, I'm trying to work out how does it actually work? Who is responsible for lodging that complaint then? Are we all responsible, or is no one, or are we all equally as responsible? Or who would that expectation be on? And what's the policy we've got in place to ensure that complaints don't slip through the net? That's what I want to know. How do we ensure that complaints do get to where they end up? And it's not around a customer or you can do, who has to, who should do, who is the obligation on to lodge that as a complaint then?
Yeah, so I guess what we're saying is when complaints are being sent to multiple people at multiple levels within the council, is there a hierarchy of who should or shouldn't respond, or is it just a case of everyone's kind of got it and everyone should forward it on?
It would be the responsibility of anybody who's got that complaint. It's difficult to say, well, if that person gets a complaint, they have to forward it on. It's an awareness of the complaints procedure across the authority that it is there, and it is there to deal with customers' complaints. So if anybody, officer, member, chief exec receives a complaint, then they can forward it to the customer experience team, and we will deal with it as a complaint.
Right. So I guess currently there isn't a specific. If someone above my level gets it, to assume that they're going to submit it. So it's a case. So there isn't a fixed kind of mechanism that means someone else will respond, even though I've got it, and it's we all just need to just sort of work to. It's down to the if I know that, say, Majid is going to respond. Then obviously, but if I don't know Majid's good to respond, then I would submit it myself. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes, anybody can submit a complaint to the customer experience team if you're not sure they can provide advice and guidance. But within the complaints procedure, there isn't anything specific that says the highest level of person that receives the complaint should log it with the customer experience team.
Thank you.
Chair, like I said, I want to make a recommendation if anyone would be kind enough to second it, and we need absolute clarification on the complaints procedure and how complaints are channeled and whose responsibility is to lodge that complaint. And I would always make the assumption that the most senior person dealing with that service area, so as an example, if I don't know if it was from a council level, it'd be, in this specific instance, Councillor Phil Cole. He'd be the one then lodging that complaint. And from an operational point of view, it would be Dan Swain then who's lodging that complaint. I would make that assumption. And I think in most corporate organisations, that would be the assumption which is taken, that the person with most seniority in that conversation would be the one who's lodging that complaint. I just want to make a recommendation that we're absolutely clear and we've got the correct processing place to ensure that all complaints received are lodged and none slip through the system. Would anyone second me on that?
I agree entirely. I mean, it's a nonsense, isn't it, that you make the assumption that, actually, when I get to a point of being frustrated in not having the answers to some of the questions he asked because they are either complaints or there could be service issues, and just not getting the answer from those people who you expect to get the answer is not very good at all, and it's got to be shown to have a structure within the process. And I know there's a basic structure, because when you go online, you look at Doncaster, but it's nowhere near as. And the example I was picking up was Sheffield, and actually the heading, when you put complaints in the website, it comes up as corporate complaints. It don't come up like it just says in complaints and such like in Doncaster. I think that would be very good to look at that particular aspect, so people know and are quite happy that when they put a complaint in, a corporate complaint, and I've still got an issue because I asked this, what's the difference between a complaint and a corporate complaint? Always keep asking a question, never seem to get the right answer. I suppose looking at it in this discussion, that a complaint is, it's about service issues and all the rest of it. but a corporate complaint is something that's escalated above that. And I think that's one of the things that we clearly ought to identify within the process, you know, so people know when they go on their website and they want to make an issue that they are making that complaint.
Okay, thank you. We'll take those recommendations back.
Okay, so Majid, did you have another question at the end of that about something different?
Yeah, it was just around our, I think it's on page 40 or page 41, it's about, you know, the unreasonable behaviour policy. And I think it's known as a SPOC in some circles, isn't it? And what the criteria is and who gets to decide that on what might be unreasonable. As an example, I don't know, if somebody's got one person might determine something to be a legitimate query that they keep raising over and over because they're not getting questions, like Councillor Allen isn't getting responses to the questions he keeps raising. And could we then say, right, okay, that's unreasonable? Who gets to determine at what point that comes in force and how it's managed?
We've got the unreasonable behaviour policy that a few years ago replaced the persistent complaints policy because we were seeing an increase of incidences across the council, across the authority, that by service users that would have been classed as unreasonable, that weren't covered within the persistent complainants policy. So it depends on the person's behaviour. It can range from where somebody has a complaint, they're pursuing their complaint in a way that can affect the investigation of their complaint, or residents that don't have a complaint but take up a disproportionate amount of council time and resources, whether they're sending emails, phone calls, visiting council buildings. It also covers abusive and threatening and offensive behaviour, and that includes in person, over the phone, in writing or by electronic methods, email, social media as well. So the policy covers a wide range. Each individual person is taken on its own merit because unreasonable behaviour is so different in different ways. So it might be if the officers are, and it's escalated, that this person is constantly telephoning, they're constantly emailing lots of different people or just a specific officer, then it might be the decision of the service area that they want to actually put something in place to streamline that person's behaviour and contact with the council, and also to help them do that. So it might be, it's whatever's appropriate for that person in those situations. So it might be, so a SPOC, a single point of contact. So if somebody is constantly emailing lots and lots of different people with the same issue, lots of emails, whether it's abusive or it is just the constant emails or contact that we're getting, that service area might decide to actually implement a single point of contact. Now that has got to be agreed by the assistant director of that service area and also agreed with myself, head of customer services. We also, when we're coming to actually put somebody on the unreasonable behaviour policy, that decision would also be discussed with the legal as well. This person would receive a letter first, or communication, how they want to communicate with us, advising them that if they don't modify their behaviour, change their behaviour, whatever, then we will consider putting them on the unreasonable behaviour policy register, and they are sent a copy of that policy. But it can range from, we've currently got 16 people on the register, and it can range from the one-stop shop downstairs being barred because of violence and aggressive behaviour to somebody continually emailing, continuing telephone calling, and they've got a single point of contact in place.
Thank you. I mean, it's perfectly understandable. I mean, some aspects, I think everyone would agree are unreasonable and people would have measures put in place against them, so violence or intimidation and threats and the rest of it. But do we run the risk at the same time, though, if people have got a genuine complaint or query and they're raising that, and it might just be frustration which leads them to then raise it through multiple channels and to different officers because they feel that they're not getting a response or an adequate response or not getting the help that they need? And could it be that we run the risk of isolating people who need our help. And has there been an instance ever where a request for Spock has come to you and an AD, and you've looked through it and decided that, oh, hang on, actually, rather than giving a Spock, this person's got a legitimate query that they're not getting a response or answer on?
Yeah, when considering if somebody is actually put on a single point of contact or is managed under the unreasonable behaviour policy, yeah, we do look at all the contact that they get and have the issues being addressed, and it's about supporting that person as well, and having not just that person has to have access to council services, and it's about managing or streamlining that access.
And has there been any instances when a request has been made to you by a service area and you and an AD have looked at it and decided that, no, it wasn't appropriate to put a Spock in? You know, on the contrary, we should be helping this individual with whatever queries they're raising, and we've not been as helpful as what we could have been as a local authority in helping them?
No, not so much, not for not being as helpful as we could be. We have had where officers have approached us and are requesting a Spock in place because somebody's they're considering that contact to be unreasonable. When we've looked at the number of contacts, how the contact in the content of that contact, yeah, we have decided on a number of occasions that it's not unreasonable, that resident's behaviour.
Councillor Jones, did you want to comment quickly?
I just wonder where all this is recorded.
We have an unreasonable behaviour register that is managed by the customer experience team that sits within customer services, and they keep a record of that because we'll often get people contacting from multiple areas across the authority regarding the same person, and that is kept on the register and then it's regularly reviewed.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to move on to a question from Antoinette next.
Right, so I don't want to trot round that circle again, and my question kind of relates to what we've been talking about. And really, I want to know, is there one person who's responsible for coordinating complaints, and that might kind of, I suppose, link to the fact that there doesn't appear to be, and I don't know, doesn't appear to be a one-stop shop. So, yes, I can request a service, but if the service isn't adequate, I need to make a complaint, and therefore the complaint might go to the head of service, but needs also to go to somebody who will oversee the complaints to ensure that the complaints are dealt with effectively. Is there one person that does that, or is it a process now that we might have to look at because we need to streamline the complaints process and have somebody have that oversight?
Yeah, Doncaster Council has a customer experience team that sits within customer services. So we have 3 customer experience officers who deal with complaints and compliments for adults, children's social care and corporate complaints. They're responsible for recording, monitoring, reporting on complaints in accordance with the corporate and statutory complaint procedure. They provide advice and guidance to officers. They identify trends in complaints and capture lessons learnt. St Ledger Homes have a customer relations team whose role is to ensure all complaints are tracked and properly investigated by an officer from the relevant area of the business. And DCLT contact centre managers coordinate all customer feedback that's then delegated to the appropriate manager to deal with. So all 3 organisations have officers teams that deal with and coordinate complaints across the organisations. So if we get a complaint, the customer experience have that complaint, it's sent to the relevant service area to respond to, and then that response is quality assured, ensured that it is responded to on time and within the timescales.
So the directorate scrutinising themselves, or is there an overarching person who would take responsibility for overall scrutiny to ensure that, because if you look at the next question, it's around the Ombudsman's letter where, action was almost taken against the authority for not providing adequate information and timely information, and that might be a directorate's responsibility for not doing that. Is there an overarching person who would take responsibility for kind of coordinating complaints generally, or would that be yourself?
Yeah, that would be the customer experience team with myself within customer services.
So if we move on to the next question, and have clear procedures and checks been put into place to ensure that some of the issues that the Ombudsman refers to won't happen again, and somebody would check that that would be the case, so we don't get into the situation where complaints are escalated further and further.
Yeah, those checks are in place within the customer experience team and also the annual complaint report that we produce here. That is a check and a balance so the council can see and partners how complaints are being handled across all three organisations.
Okay. Does anybody have any other questions before we close this part of the meeting? No. Okay, so I think we just need to. Obviously note the report. Yeah, could you? Is that okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just quickly go over what has been said during this meeting. I've got a couple of areas where the Head of Customer Service is actually going to come back to the committee with, and I'll let her know those areas that she needs to come back to you on. Now, there was the recommendation that you raised about being clear on the, and I'm going to use the hierarchy of reports complaints. So I'm going to put that recommendation forward to the Head of Customer Service on the back of this meeting, that they come back with an outline as to how that actually works, so that members are clear as to how the service works and how the system works, if that's okay. And that'll be a recommendation on the back of this meeting. Okay, is that okay, Chair? And sorry, and after you finish this item, then I'll need to go on to the work planning. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so we'll close that part of the meeting and move on to the work plan. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chair. Really, it's just to outline the work plan to everybody. It's actually cracking on quite well. I know we've got an awful lot of things coming up in children's. We've had bits and bobs for health, early doors, and we've got quite a few things coming up in the future again with regeneration and housing. We've had things early doors, and things will be coming on later on in the year. So there are things happening. So if there is anything that you need to speak to me about, then just bring it to my attention. But everything's in place for you, and we're getting there and we're getting through things. There's also the Council's forward plan of key decisions on the agenda there for you to have a look through. And if there's anything on there, then again, please let us know. Thank you, Chair.
Brilliant. All right, I'll call the meeting to a close, and then I think we've got a little briefing coming next. Is that right?
Chair, can we take a 2-minute break? Is that okay? I want to get a cup of tea. Everyone's all right with that? Sorry.